All right. We are thrilled to have on the Endless Hustle today. Today's show, an MSNBC journalist and author of the new book, Pops, My Father, Our Journey, and What I'm Still Learning About Being a Dad, Mr. Craig Melvin. Thanks for making the time, Craig.
Matt, thank you. Thanks for having me. Good to see you guys. I'm a fan.
Excellent, man. Let's start off with the book. Can you talk about its genesis and why you focused on the subject of family instead of a more kind of career-centric approach, as one may expect?
Well, yeah, I haven't been doing it long enough to write a professional memoir, so I didn't want to go that route. And at the start of the pandemic, it was cheaper than therapy. I mean, I like a lot of sons. I have a complicated relationship with my dad. It has gotten exponentially better. And during I guess it was late last year, there was a publishing house. They sort of approached me about writing this book about dads, because I do a series for the Today Show called Dad's Got This. And I didn't honestly think it was book worthy. And then I was talking to a guy, and we were talking about our relationships with our fathers. And then he said, well, that's actually probably a story worth telling. So we started going back and forth, and I wanted to make sure I weaved in the stories of some of the really cool dads I've met along the way. But the bulk of the book is about my father, who grew up not knowing who his father was for much of the early part of his life. He was born in prison, and he has dealt with addictions throughout his life. First booze, then gambling, then cigarettes. But it's a story about redemption and renewal, and how a guy who's almost 70 years old manages to get all those monkeys off his back using sheer willpower. So it's a story with a happy ending, but I'd also like to think it's pretty funny. I mean, there's some parts in the book that I write about that are pretty laugh out loud funny. A lot of it's about my childhood in South Carolina, where I spent a lot of my time helping my dad on various projects under the hood of his 1973 Pontiac Le Mans, or digging up the sewer line. That we did that one summer. And from the time I was 6 or 7 until the time I was 16 or 17, I never got a promotion. I was like still holding the flashlight or passing a socket wrench. Like, he never thought. So there's part of it's just funny anecdotes that I think a lot of dads can relate to. So it's also not just a book for dads. It's a book for anyone that has had someone in their life who has struggled mightily with something, whether it's an addiction, whether it's an illness. And it's a book about how people get through that, how families get through that. But again, going back to my first point, at the end of the day, it'd be great if someone bought the book. It'd be nice. But at the end of the day, I wrote the book for my dad, and I wrote the book because I didn't want to spend all that money on therapy over the past year. It was a great escape during a pandemic.
Craig, before we got started, I was complimenting you and the rest of the cast at the Today Show. I've just had the privilege of chatting with all of you guys many times over the years. We're all getting old together, which is great. And I always say one of the nicest, if not the nicest casts on television. As we were going through just this crazy time, and we're still obviously going through it, but hopefully coming out on the other end now with COVID, you guys were a beacon of light to everybody who had to essentially sit at home and live in this horrible reality we were in. What was some of the incredible feedback that you would receive from viewers as you were able to bring this light into their homes?
It's a good question. Arthur, I did not fully appreciate how much the show was a part of people's lives until the start of the pandemic. I don't know if that makes sense, but I mean, I always knew, obviously the Today Show's been around for 70 years. It's one of the longest running news programs in the history of television. I was familiar with the history, with the institution that is America's favorite morning news program. I did not know how much of a part of people's routines we had become over the years. And all of a sudden, the pandemic hits, and everyone's sort of being forced to stay inside. You can't do you can't do the kind of newscast, the kind of show that we do. You can't do it just from here. That doesn't work. So, early on, a decision was made that we were going to go into the studio. We would split the show. So Hoda and I were in Studio 1A. Savannah was at her house. And part of the reason was because, especially early on, if one of us got COVID, we didn't want the entire cast getting taken out. So we sort of had to divide and conquer. But for several months, I would go into Studio 1A, and it was me and Hoda Kotb, and one guy behind like one camera. And there was like one security guy, no hair, no makeup, no wardrobe. There were like 6 people in the control room. And early on, it was really sad. And there were a couple of times where I became emotional on the air or on the ride home from the studio, because so much of what we do on the show revolves around interaction, cooking segments and lifestyle segments and steals and deals and celebrity interviews and all this stuff. And like that, it's gone. And we're forced to do it via remote by and large. And then we realized quickly after the pandemic started, yes, we had to obviously report on the gloom and doom that was, the early stages of the pandemic, especially, and the death tolls and just the sickness and the uncertainty around what was causing the virus and the symptoms, all that stuff. We had to do that. But we also saw a tremendous opportunity to tell stories about the first responders and about the teachers who had, in the span of 2 weeks, figured out how to teach all of our kids virtually. We figured out how we could celebrate the folks that we had long been taking for granted in this country. So we started devoting a lot of our time on the show to celebrating the people who were saving us, or celebrating the people who were delivering our goods. Who knew that the UPS guy and the FedEx guy and the postal, who knew that these people would become everyday heroes? So we got to tell those stories. And so that was cool. I remember one of my favorite live shots we did was from the hospital there in Harlem, and these nurses who had they'd been getting hammered for months, and they had seen all this sickness and sadness and death and loss, and it was taking a toll on them. Personally, it was just taking this toll on their spirits and their souls. And we had this idea. I've never had any good ideas. The producers have all the good ideas, but someone had this great idea of going down to the hospital and just celebrating the nurses. And we went down we went up to the hospital in Harlem, and we spent a morning just celebrating those nurses, but nurses all over the country. And it was hard not to get emotional.
Craig, awesome. I got to say, we've had a few guests on here where it's just you just give them the floor. We had Neil deGrasse Tyson, we've had Jalen Rose, and it's just you let them talk. I think you're one of those people now where it's just like, this makes our job so much easier because you're just more eloquent than anything that we can conjure up.
Well, Matt, you're kind. The problem is, and Liz knows this, and I guess I'm faking it reasonably well. I hate this. I don't like, when you ask questions for a living, you don't like answering questions.
Yeah.
But thanks.
Yeah. So one of your most watched clips on YouTube is your interview with Michael Jordan after he opened his health clinic in 2019. You were sipping tequila with MJ. How was that experience for you? And what did you learn about Michael that you may not have known?
I'll tell you how the experience was so awesome. I've already insisted to my wife that it be included in my obituary. I've selected the picture that I want her to use. It's funny because you guys, this, like there are certain interviews that you want and you just persist and you persist and you persist. I had been hounding Michael Jordan for a sit down. This is not an exaggeration. It's probably the better part of 5 years, to the point where his people just stopped responding. I'm sure they thought I was a stalker. And then out of the blue one day, I get a call, and we had a mutual friend, and they were like, "Hey, Mike wants to know if you want to sit down and talk about this health clinic that he's starting in North Carolina."
Awesome.
And I said to the person on the other end, I won't use the exact language I used, but I thought that it was a joke. I thought that they were punking me because they knew how much time I had spent pursuing Michael Jordan. So it was right at the beginning of The Last Dance. Like, The Last Dance was about to come out in a few months. And I remember, because you prep for interviews, like, you prepare meticulously for, and the bigger the interview, the more you prepare typically. And so I'd been preparing for, like weeks. And then all of a sudden, like, MJ shows up, and I am reduced to my 10-year-old self. And I'm like, "Hey, oh man, Space Jam was great. You remember, it wasn't Space Jam 1, and like all my notes are like out of the window, and I managed to pull it together for the interview. But it's funny because you know this, like, the best stuff you typically get from someone like Jordan, it's not when the camera's on, it's before or after. And I think I asked him something as innocuous before we started the interview. I said something like, the Last Dance, you think people are going to love it? At that point, no one had seen it. They wouldn't give me a preview. Like, it was under lock and key. Allegedly, they were still like editing, like, a few nights before it debuted. And I'm thinking, it's MJ. Like, naturally, he's going to say it's going to be the greatest documentary ever. It's going to be amazing. And he didn't. I remember before we started rolling, he said something along the lines of, "I don't think it's going to sit well. He was worried about how he was going to be viewed. His chief concern was, keep in mind, the Bulls dynasty was the 90s. There was no social media. There wasn't this. He was concerned that people were going to sort of view him through the lens of today, and that maybe people weren't going to be able to fully appreciate what it took to win at that level consistently. He was worried about coming across as a jackass. And I maintain, and my bias notwithstanding, I maintain that it is right now the greatest sports documentary I've ever seen. Now, granted, and I grew up, during that era, but no, it was, that experience is one that I will cherish. And then, to your point, at the end, he's like, "Hey, you want to have some tequila?" I'm like, "I'll drink the bottle." And, the problem was it was 9:30 in the morning.
From what I remember, you were a little heavy-handed, though. He called you up for it.
He did.
Yeah.
That was the hand of a nervous journalist. I was like, I
Accept
didn't know
me.
how much to give him. I wanted to make sure he knew that I was excited. But it was funny because, MJ rolled in with like his family, like his mom was there and his brother was there. And it was funny, his mom, he's introduced me to his family before, and met some of his kids were there, and his mom, I kid you not, she said, "Oh, Matt, Matt," she said, "Craig, I watch the show. I really enjoy the show every morning. I love that Al Roker. I've been watching Al for you." She's going on and on about America's favorite weatherman. And after the interview was done, I called Roker. I was like, "Dude, you're not going to believe who's a big fan."
Oh my God.
Everyone loves Roker.
Everyone.
People get so starstruck with Al. It's incredible. I've seen it so many times.
It's Arthur. It really is a sight to behold, because I've traveled with Roker. I've walked through airports. I've been in restaurants, bars. It's like you're on tour with Jesus Christ. It really is quite strange. And it, more than anything, it's just a testament to how damn long he's been doing it. Like it's like Roker he'll tell stories sometimes. Scratch that. He tells a story every day that he either has to preface with, it was before you were born, or this is, your parents might remember this. But like a couple of days ago, he's telling some soupy sales story. And I'm like on my phone Googling like soupy. I was like, oh, yeah, it's a 1960s cartoon. That's right. And he tells these stories, and sometimes he'll tell these jokes. And Savannah, Hoda, myself, Carson, we'll kind of have to look at each other and we'll nod or we'll pretend like we know what he's talking about. And then a few minutes later, someone will say, "Did you catch that one?" No, it's right over my head. No one knew.
Speaking of catching something, over your left shoulder, there is a football player.
Oh, that's you. Wow, you got a good eye. You got a keen eye. Here, so
What is?
it's not just one.
How did you spot that, Arthur?
I'm the king of. Wait, he's got a Mahomes cutout. This is incredible.
So so my son, he's 7 now, and he's discovered the joys and wonders of football. I don't know if you can still see it, but yeah, it's right there. And a couple years ago, and I think it's because he kind of looks like maybe Patrick Mahomes would have looked when he was Dell's age, but he like out of the blue became a Patrick Mahomes fan. We have no ties to Kansas City. And we're actually kind of Washington football fans. Mom, his mom and I, my wife, and he started like really getting to Patrick Mahomes to the point where like he insisted on seeing the games every week. And you can't watch Kansas City games here. I don't have like DirecTV or Dish or whatever it comes on NFL Network. So last year, when the pandemic was in full force, we couldn't have a birthday party for him. So we decided to throw a football themed party, and we invited Patrick Mahomes. And at some point, he also became a fan of Lamar Jackson, who's also deep in the cornerback there. But it's quite odd. It's actually very unusual. A few years ago, I got to spend some time with Mr. Mahomes. But this was before my son was a huge fan. But I'm pleased to report that Patrick Mahomes is also one of those guys who is as kind in person as he appears to be on television.
I want to know where you were when you got the call up. The Today Show is the major leagues. Where were you and what was your reaction when you got that call that you were going to be made anchor?
Oh, that's I remember it vividly, actually. I was here in the basement. And it was New Year's Eve or New Year's Day. And all the years sort of run together now. So this is 2021. This would have been, Liz will have to correct me after the fact, but I think it was 2019. But anyway, the president of our news division called and said, "Hey, we'd like to put you on Monday through Friday." And I remember thinking, wow. And I tried to play it cool on the phone, and I hung up. And my wife can attest to this. I got emotional, Arthur, because to your point, for people who do what we do, when you go into broadcast journalism,
it's the Yankees.
It's the Yankees. That is an apt comparison. And it's also one of those things where it's funny because, you and I and Matt, we're having this conversation now, and your millions of viewers and readers, they'll watch and read this. But when I started in Columbia, South Carolina, when I was, 22, I wasn't very good. And I didn't think for a while, I was like, I may just go to law school or grad school, because I wasn't convinced early in my career that I was going to make a go of it. And then you do it long enough and you get better at it. And I really started to fall in love with the craft, with doing this, just having conversations with sometimes ordinary people, sometimes extraordinary people, sometimes athletes or actors or presidents. I fell in love with that. And then the pace of the newsroom and all of it. And then just the variety of the stories and not being stuck in an office and not having to do the same thing every day. It was like this constant adrenaline rush. And so when I got the call and I got the offer, it was validation. Because anybody at this level who tells you that they're like, oh yeah, I thought this is how it would work out, they're lying. Like it's years of self-doubt. It's years of doing a lot of stories that you really don't want to do. I covered a lot of car wrecks, a lot of house fires, a lot of robberies because there was cool surveillance video. I did a lot of interviews with the water and sewer commissioner in some obscure town. I did all that for a long time. And I had a handful of folks along the way, a handful, not a lot, who would say, it's going to be worth it. Trust, it's going to be worth it. It's going to be worth it. You're good enough. You're smart enough. Doggone it, you're handsome enough. People who would say all those things. And then after a while, you start to believe it. And also not to get too, I know this isn't a religious podcast, but I am a man of deep faith. And I spent a lot of time not praying for professional success, but praying for being in God's will and wanting to make sure that whatever I was doing, that it was serving some sort of greater purpose. And now for a number of years, I struggled with whether I was actually doing that. And now I feel like on more days than not, I am contributing. That was a really long answer to a really.
No, that was just wind them up and let them go.
But this is why I hate doing these things, because you ask nice, short, pointed questions like a good journalist, and I start bloviating.
No, but it's great because, listen, you deal with this as much as we do. The sound bites, it just gets old. And hearing actually these authentic, raw answers is like what I live for. So it's awesome, dude.
Okay. All right. I'm sure I'll get in trouble, but.
Craig, you mentioned, the presidents you sat down with, Clinton, Biden, Jordan, which I'd put in presidential level. Who was the one subject who you were most nervous to talk to? Or are you such a seasoned pro at this point that nerves don't even play into
it? Presidential interviews always make you nervous. Those are always stressful. I will say I wasn't as nervous as I should have been in 2000. I was in local news in Columbia, South Carolina. This was 2007. This may have been early 2008. No, it was early 2008. It was early 2008 because it was ahead of the South Carolina primary. This was maybe January, February that year, and a buddy of mine had quit his job and he had started working on a campaign for this senator from Illinois. And I remember he called me and he was telling me about this. And I was like, dude, I don't know if that's the best idea. Like, his name's Barack Obama and he's a black guy and he's running for president. I was like, do what you will. It's your life. But if you're asking my opinion, I'd keep the job you have. And so a couple months later, same guy calls me up and he's like, would you like to sit down with the candidate? And at that point, he wasn't the leading candidate. I mean, he was in the race. He picked up some traction. And I remember, like, I was doing the interview, and it was Barack Obama, so it was impressive. Like, you hear everything he's saying, and it's just, glass shack, all this stuff. Like, I appreciated the history of it. But I remember after the interview, producer said to me, the producer's like, "What do you think?" I was like, "Wow, it's impressive, but I mean, his name's Barack Obama. And I think I heard or read that his middle name's Hussein. There's no way he's going to win South Carolina." I'm going on. And I mean, it's just, I am frequently reminded by that friend how wrong I was. I should have been more nervous in that interview. I was not. But no, I get nervous. I get nervous a lot. And the only thing I have found that helps me with the nerves is, and I did this just last week, I guess I was at the White House for a sit down with President Biden. And, I'm in the Roosevelt room and there are all these people around. And I'm middle school, first dance in the gym nervous, like that kind of nervous. But I can't let on that I'm nervous. So I do this weird thing where I start talking to random people and asking them like stupid questions, like the sound guy. Hey, Joe, where are your kids going to college again? Or there's some Secret Service guy say, where are you? What part of Wisconsin are you from? How long have you been here? How long have you been doing this? And so, and what you forget is like for interviews like that, like we're piping the sound out to like 30 Rock. So there are 30 people like on these Zooms who can hear all of the ridiculous things you're saying. A couple years ago, I was at the African American History Museum, and I had secured the first interview with the new president, President Trump. It was just going to be what we call a drive-by. He was going to like walk by and stop. I was the only reporter there. I was just going to answer a few questions. And I'm doing that thing I just talked about, where I'm just like talking to random people because I'm totally nervous. And I can't let on that I'm nervous. And I'm doing that thing. And finally, I won't reveal their name, but one of my bosses like calls me on my cell phone and she's like, hey, just so you know, everyone can hear everything you're saying. I'm like, oh my God. Oh my God. And I mean, God only knows at that point what I've been saying. So I learned an important lesson there. Someone's always listening.
Craig, you've received a few Emmys for your broadcasting work, an AP award. You were named Best Anchor in South Carolina. What would you say your crowning achievement thus far in broadcasting is?
Oh God, my crowning achievement?
What do you like hold your hat on the most?
I mean, he's going to have Jordan on his obituary.
Well, I mean, interviews notwithstanding, at this point in my career, I'm proudest of the fact I haven't been fired. I have managed to hold on to a job longer than I think a lot of folks probably thought I would, longer than I probably thought I would when I started at 22. No, I think the crowning achievement for us, it's longevity. Like you look at guys like Roker, for instance, guys like Al who have been doing it at this level since probably before you guys were born too. Like that's a feat, especially when you say and do some of the absolutely ridiculous things that he has said and done, and to still be able to show up for work every day and have your card key work. Like that's a crowning accomplishment.
Craig, before we let you go, one of the pillars of this show is to talk to successful people like you and determine how you continue to elevate. So given all the accolades you've earned in your career and personal life, what habits or words to live by do you incorporate in your life to ensure that you continue to elevate?
There are two things that I do every day. Actually, I do one of them every day. I typically rotate. So for instance, this morning, I always start the day in my dressing room engaging in mindfulness. It's not meditation. It's not like, it's none of that. But years ago, I did a story on a guy named Andy Puddicombe who started Headspace. And I started using his app. And I have found it has helped me immensely. Start the day grounded, centered, sort of not in my head, but alone with my thoughts. That helps. And it's like 10, 15 minutes. That helps me, mindfulness. And the other thing, and this is something that Hoda turned me on to a couple of years ago, and I know it may sound cheesy, but I journal. I'm a big fan of journaling. I can't do it every day because of my schedule sometimes. So I typically try to do it, at least 3 times a week. So usually it's mindfulness one day, journaling the next, mindfulness journaling. So it's, and I don't typically do it on Sunday. I typically take Saturday or Sunday off, but both of those things. And the journaling for me, and it's not like I'm not writing 3 or 4 pages every day. Sometimes it's just like 3 paragraphs. And sometimes it's a chronicle of whatever I've done the day before. Sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's sad, sometimes it's me just venting about something large or small. But I always end the journaling every day. I always end, and this is per Hoda's instructions. I end with something that I'm grateful for. And some days it's something big, like on Monday, I journaled that I was grateful because I was going to receive my second shot on Monday. But other days it's, I'm grateful that the kids both slept in their beds the night before, and I was able to get 6 or 7 hours. But it forces you to start the day in a place of gratitude versus starting the day with a chip on your shoulder, starting the day with, oh, I got to do this. Oh, I didn't get to do this. So you start the day up versus starting the day, man, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
One more thing before you go, Craig, can we just talk about how awesome Will Smith is with his Instagram posts? Like, if you couldn't love that guy anymore, he just made himself even more lovable.
He did, but here's the thing, Arthur. Like I saw Will Smith's like pandemic dad bod. I was like, that's like my bod 6 years ago when I was in shape. Like it was like, oh, I'm so fat. I've let myself go so much. Like, you snot. And here's the other thing. Yeah, okay, maybe he's put on a few LBs. It was the shorts. The shorts, that's what really sort of made it worse than I think it probably seemed. Like, you can't wear shorts like that. I don't care if you're Will Smith or Arthur or Matt or Craig. Like, those aren't shorts that a grown man should be wearing outside his bedroom.
Only Will Smith. If anyone can get away with anything, it's Will Smith. That guy's got so much goodwill currency built up. He's just the king.
Agreed.
Craig, congrats on the new book, man. Really great stuff. As someone who didn't have a close relationship with his own father, and now he's my best friend, to be able to relate to your story, I'm sure there's millions of us out there. It's just really cool stuff you were able to share, man.
Well, Arthur and Matt, I hope that that's one of the reasons I wrote it, for folks who've had those difficult relationships with their dad or their mom. But you should never write someone off. You should never give up on anyone, because that's where we were. And my dad in his late 60s started living a new life, and if he can do it, anybody can do it. And if ours is a relationship that can be repaired, any relationship can be repaired.
Pops, My Father, Our Journey, and what I'm still learning about being a dad, from the charismatic Craig Melvin. Thank you for joining the show. You're welcome back anytime.
Thank you, guys. I enjoyed this.